Good afternoon and welcome all. We're continuing with the hearing of submissions on Plan Change 7. And the first submission we're to hear this afternoon is that of Silvacrest Farms. Who's going to speak for them?
Afternoon all.
Welcome.
My name's Harry Meyer and I'm speaking on behalf of Silvacrest Farms. My plan of attack is to build a story about what we do and touch on areas of concerns in my submission, and then I'll summarise at the end.
Right, so thank you very much.
We farm on the north bank of the Waimak River, just above the new Ngaitahu Farms. We're a dairy-based operation and fluff around with a bit of other stuff as well. We've got 4 different soil types and all of them are stony silt loams. We're in the nutrient zone, somewhat arbitrarily classed the blue zone. We agree in principle with what's trying to be achieved with Plan Change 7. It's the methodology that concerns us. As farmers, it's important that we keep aware of the science around farming. What used to be considered good practice may not be now. And in the latter few decades, higher end use has actually tended to correlate with a higher level of profitability. But we've been prepared to look outside the square. Around 12 years ago, we were, as recommended, roughly half a tonne of superphosphate and 250 kilos of N per hectare as urea. We were becoming a bit uncomfortable with some of the potential issues around our mainstream fertiliser use. For example, potassium chloride is our cheapest form of potassium, but what do we chuck in our swimming pools to kill the bugs? Is that why we need dung beetles? Because we're stuffing something up. Since then, we've tried some different things. We've trialled biological stimulants. N use in that first year went down to 90 units of N. That was a disaster, but by crikey, we learnt some stuff. Now we've settled on a bit of both, biological and mainstream, if you like, which includes 150 odd kilos of N per hectare now, and that's made up of solid fertilisers, chicken litter and some biological witch's brew. We've got a variety of pasture species we use based on alternative grasses, not just ryegrass, depending on what we're trying to achieve. Now, I always have a shovel on the back of my truck, but they tell me it doesn't have moisture telemetry. When we first put the moisture meters in at home, we actually dug trenches to better understand our soils and the irrigation scheduling, so we weren't just subject to a generic NIWA information, because that information is actually quite outdated and our soils have been modified somewhat since then. In the 16 years we've been where we are, we've made clear and measured increases in our soil organic matter. It's actually fairly standard that we irrigate less than our neighbours, but does that make either of us better managers? They've been working to recommendations too. So who decides what good management practice actually really is? We've noted that the science around the environmental issues isn't actually clear-cut. So sure, use some modelling to get some wheels in motion, but then we've got to be working on actual results that are getting measured. Please don't cherry-pick the science to suit an agenda. Overseer losses. If I've got, for instance, an N loss figure of 60, say, and a neighbour has a N loss figure of 100, and we have to reduce by, say, 30%, then he hasn't even got down to my starting figure. I strongly feel that we need to be working on the cap and not as a percentage. Winter cropping. If wintering becomes more intensive because of area limitations, then that may be counterproductive. The effects of wintering on nutrient losses should be captured by overseer. I would suggest, as a personal opinion, not allowing consecutive winter cropping to help preserve soil structure, and a requirement for winter management guidelines in each farm's farm environment plans. In terms of community, it's actually critical. We need to remain profitable in order to help contribute to a thriving community, both financially and socially. Every dollar we spend locally gets used several times. We need to be, beg your pardon, we seem to be under more and more pressure to do this and pay for that. So please be practical and have realistic expectations. In summary then, I've tried to show I'm farming with many considerations in mind. I don't always get it right, but I try, and by golly, I do care. Use overseer by all means to manage nutrient losses. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. Deal with the greatest losses first, and use the overseer model to capture winter grazing effects. Use modelling first because we've got to start somewhere, but then please use actual results to guide policy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Meyer. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Mr. Meyer?
Yes, just one in your summary, you said you preferred to work with a cap rather than percentages. Could you just expand on that a little bit more?
What I mean by that, sir, is that rather than don't be confused with capping in terms of inputs. What I'm saying is that we need to lower the level from the worst offenders, deal with those issues first, and bring in others progressively as that applies, if you understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, and hence you mentioned an example of a neighbour being on 100 and you being on 60.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions?
No, no questions from me, thank you.
Well, Mr. Meyer, you've been thoughtful in preparing the notes from which you spoke, and they're straight to the point, and you're continuing to work rationally to achieve good management. I like your point about not cherry-picking the science to suit an agenda, and I like your emphasis on what's practical and realistic. So thank you very much for coming in and giving us your views. That's what we want to hear.
Good on you. Thank you for your time. Cheerio.
Next, we might hear from Eyerton Produce.
Longer than the previous one, and probably a little bit more long-winded. I'll apologise in advance. My name's Tim McFarlane, and I farm in the Eyerton district. Our family has farmed at Hailstone, a 250-hectare crop and vegetable farm since 1852. I worked for my uncle for 8 years prior to purchasing the farm in my own right in 1996. And have farmed there for the subsequent 24 years. I have 4 sons currently studying at 4 different universities within New Zealand, and in a way my submission is for them and the next generation of farmers, as they will have to deal with the outcomes of Plan Change 7. My focus of this submission is more about the proposals, how the proposals may affect our farm, and not about the legal issues or the policy wording. Plenty of others for that. Our farming system is 70 hectares of, now 70% of arable crops and 30% vegetables, with a focus on developing the vegetable side. This is where I see the future of our high-quality land type. We've made significant capital investment in infrastructure for this. And every year we trial small areas of different crops to see how they grow and how they might fit into our farming system. Over time, different crop options will come available to us, and we need to keep trialling these and have the ability to develop them when the opportunities arise. Our biggest constraint on our farm is a high water table and drainage. We have 5 miles of open drains that contribute to Silverstream, and every one of those drains originate within the farm and were dug by previous generations to enable us to farm the land. Most of the drains run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and are designed to cope with the high water table. Managed aquifer recharging, especially from the Waimakariri River to Silverstream or from sources above, could and most likely ruin our highly productive land by raising the water table, not to mention risks of Didimo and spring-fed streams like Silverstream spells a disaster far greater than the current nitrate levels. We have a sustainable outlook towards irrigation. We irrigate to ensure production, not to maximise production. We do not generally irrigate cereals, as I don't believe we gain an economic response from it. We do, however, irrigate our high-value transplanted seedlings and crops, vegetable seedlings and crops as and when required. Our consents to irrigate are from 3 surface wells and from drains within our farm. While we do not use all our water allocation, it is critical for us to have access to water to ensure reliable vegetable production, a requirement of our customers, progressive enterprises and foodstuffs. We employ casual staff throughout the season and up to 20 at a time, and generally manage to source them locally. Silverstream proposed minimum flows for consent holders is a concern. As I previously mentioned, we target our irrigation very carefully and only apply when necessary. We stagger our vegetable plantings weekly for around 4 to 5 months. Therefore, irrigation timing is critical. I believe this may not be the case in a pasture situation where a day or two either way doesn't make the difference between success or failure of a crop. I've heard discussions at various meetings that there is a proposal to discontinue shallow water takes in our area as a possible way to lower nitrate levels in Silverstream. This proposal alone would cost us in the order of $100,000 per well, plus the supply of electricity to these wells, whereas we're currently lifting water 2 to 3 metres, which is our water table height, and putting it back onto the paddocks. Our soils have a very high water holding capacity, and this practice is very effective and efficient. We irrigate with a gun irrigator and a boom on a gun irrigator, and we irrigate small targeted areas, and we don't blanket irrigate our farm. As I mentioned in my submission, Silverstream is 43% allocated and unlikely to be allocated much more than this because all of the surrounding land has been carved up and taken out of production with largely unregulated lifestyle blocks. And I believe the modelling should reflect this. I struggle with overseer as an effective and accurate model for our farming operation. I've spent hours trying to get meaningful data from it without much success. In my early years of farm ownership, I was considered a very technical farmer by those in the arable industry who knew me. I was an early adopter of GPS technology, and it's now become an integral part of our operation. We use variable rate fertiliser application. All our tractors are controlled with RTK GPS for planting, inter-row cultivation for weed control, and we've been using proof of placement for at least 20 years. I do see that a farm environment plan might be a better way of achieving the desired outcomes. Every farm is unique and has its own strengths and limitations. We have, for example, been doing deep end tests for 15 odd years, ever since FAR started trialling them. These tests tell us the amount of available plant N there is in the soil profile down to 900 millimetres. Our applications are calculated using this information. Some paddocks will require little N to be applied and others more. Arable crops require plant available N to be applied little and often to achieve an economic yield. There's no sense in applying more nitrogen than is required by the crop, and it certainly doesn't help the bottom line or the environment. Last year, our entire farm's effective cropping area applied 161 units of N. This nitrogen message has been received loud and clear by the arable and vegetable sector, and I believe it has been taken very seriously in the industry and, from what I see, by the next generation of potential farmers. On a broader view, I worry about the accuracy of the nitrogen priority zones and how they might impact the farming in the district. I think they might not be the best way of achieving the desired outcomes. Looking so far into the future and trying to target nitrogen reductions is overwhelming. It feels like standing on the tee of a par 5 and wondering how to get there in one shot. And until you can visualise a staged approach and breaking it down into several shots, it's a bridge too far. We run a few sheep, and the sheep are mainly used as a management tool to contain weeds and reduce fire risk around buildings and arable crops. I note that when I attended Lincoln College in the early 80s, a good crop of wheat was around 6 tonne per hectare. Now 12 to 13 tonne is considered a good crop. A 12 tonne crop makes no more money per hectare than a 6 tonne crop did in the 80s. The increase in production is necessitated by an ever-increasing input and compliance costs. This example also shows how far arable farmers, with the aid of levy-funded research and development by the Foundation for Arable Research, has come. I can see that with continued research and development, New Zealand farmers can succeed to lead the world in agriculture, and we should not lose sight of this. In summary, I struggle with the weight of bureaucracy mounting on us as farmers and the fact that we feel like we must fight to maintain our operation at a status quo. We follow all the local industry advice to improve our operations both sustainably and profitably, and if we didn't, we would not be farming now, and nor would future generations. On the other hand, I'm very excited about farming in the future and see a huge potential in developing the vegetable side of our business, and would hate to see this potential limited to the point where innovation and development is quashed by Land Change 7 and bureaucracy. My hope is that generations to come will appreciate the contributions made by their forebears as much as we do. This means more than simply being sustainable, it's making the commitment to regenerational farming, in which year by year we work to further improve our land and environment. Thank you.
Excellent, Mr. McFarlane. There may be some questions. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on a couple of points from your original submission. Do you
Yes.
have a copy of that with you by any chance?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, just want to look at the last 2 bullet points that you have there.
Yeah.
And I noted, and I'll take the point you make in your written submission about the necessity of the drains. And I'm just picking up on something you said in your verbal presentation, that you run a few sheep. Do you use the sheep to keep the drains free from weeds, or do you spray the drains out?
We clean them with a drag line,
Drag line, okay.
one we've built ourselves.
Okay.
It was actually built in the 50s on a Bren gun carrier, but that's another
Is that
story.
right?
Yeah.
interesting to look at. In terms of sediment loss from the cropped areas into the drains, do you use any of the kind of measures that, say, the Horticulture New Zealand promotes in some of their guidelines, or what do you do to control sediment runoff into the drains on your farm?
Sediment runoff is a big issue. I think I said in the written submission, that we need to be able to get ponding off the paddocks within 24 hours, or you get detrimental crop damage. And land forming is one of the ways I can see that we could make great gains with. I've looked at it for years, but it's just the capital cost of setting up the machinery. It's just where you model the farm so it runs off at a correct rate, so it's not gushing off into the drains, it's just running off. That's where you can program that with the software to get it to run off in 24 hours. I see that's a huge thing. But what we do find is if you have a strip of ungrazed material or vegetation between the drain and the land that we're cultivating, if it's too large, then it works like a barrier and the water won't drain. And so that's an issue about how you can get it off and still intercept the silt.
So currently on your farm, would you use a vegetated strip, but you just make sure it's not too wide? Is that what you do, or how do you manage it?
Yes, well, most of our drains are fenced off, but with the fact that we always keep sheep out of them, but we don't have cattle. But we try not. The fences are a real problem for us because we have to take them down every year to clean the drains. So unless we're putting stock in there, we generally don't fence them off. Our main ones have been fenced for years.
Okay. And just the points you make in your last bullet point about vegetable growing, there's been quite a few submitters have made very similar points to us. I just want to reassure you that they're certainly issues we'll be looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. But other than that, no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Sullivan?
No, I have no questions, thank you.
Well, Mr. McFarlane, I like your start, that your submission is for your sons as successors to the farm. And also your comment about being a possible problem on your highly productive land. So here's another food producer with a different viewpoint again to come and to explain to us what we should be considering, and we're very grateful to you for that. And we certainly understand that there are different needs for how water is managed when you're into the arable and vegetable production. So we value your experience, and we thank you very much for coming in and giving your response personally as you've done.
Thank you very much.
Now, Croft Farming. So, Mrs. Croft, is it?
Yes.
Welcome, and thank you very much for coming. We have your submission, and we also have read your evidence statement that you put into us. Thank you. And you don't need to read those to us unless you really want to, but you're very welcome to speak to them and just tell us how it appears to you.
Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko mangateri toko manga, ko rakahuri toko awa, ko kaipoi toko ingoa, no Carlton aho. Ko Croft toko ingoa whānau, ko Katie toko ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Katie, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of our family in relation to our submission on PC7. Our farm is Carlton run. It's a 212 hectare mixed farming operation. It's intergenerational and it's family land. In our submission, we stated that we support NGF submission and WRRP submission, particularly the removal of the nitrate subgroup areas, the removal of table 8.9 reductions past 2030, and we're really thinking about the need for a measured and monitored scientific approach to further changes if they're needed past 2030. We oppose the 5% winter grazing threshold and suggest the 10%. We support the WRRP and NGF solutions package. In our statement of evidence, you'll find details regarding our farming operation, practices in relation to GMP, and photos of our family involved in kaitiakitanga. Today I'm going to share with you the impact of PC7 on our lives. As farmers, we have worked hard and invested heavily in our farm environmental improvements. Every year we've spent 30% of our income for the past 5 years on these improvements. We've worked from initially a C grade in our farm environmental plan audits to a B grade, and then since then we've changed our irrigation management practices, our nutrient management, liaised with ECAM biodiversity people, and started implementing a Mahinga Kai plan, and recently achieved an A grade on our FEP audit for 2020. With the support of WRRP and day-to-day management, working through the FEP process and access to the right knowledgeable people to allow us to learn, this has helped with this. WRRP collective approach has been important to us. With PC7, it's been extremely stressful and it has had a negative detrimental impact on our day-to-day and future plans. Once we read more and understand the implications of this document, the seriousness of the situation we are facing has become evident. We support a measured and monitored change to the environment to improve water quality, and our past and current actions reflect this. And not just about the talk or ticking the box, but actually doing it. We spent hours trying to work out why our farm is in 3 separate sub-area groups, which is noted in our submission and in our statement of evidence, which seems to be based on predicted modelling. We work on this land, we know the soil types, the poor, and with nutrient monitoring, we can't see why they're in different areas. We're in favour of a collective approach with no subgroup areas for this. The table 8.9, with the reductions past 2030, as well as the change in the winter grazing threshold, makes such significant changes to our farming operation that it will not be financially viable to remain farming. In a WRRP case study looking at GMP and in-loss reductions in detail of our farm, it shows that we can manage the reduction to 2030, but after this, the loss in operating profit starts at a 40% loss and progresses steeply downwards to nothing. The changes for PC7 mean that the investments that we've been making to improve the environment now become a financial burden, and because we don't know if we can keep farming at our current level, it leaves us in a really difficult position. What do we do? I am fortunate to have the support and the education to be able to read all these documents, attend meetings, ask questions, and learn about it and try and work out what we can do. But what about everybody else out there that's been affected by this? That for a multitude of reasons aren't able to do that. How do they understand and cope? Because there's been no consideration given to the people, the tangata whenua, in this plan. Yes, it's drawn us together to learn more and to build a collaborative solutions-based approach, but the negative impact of this on our lives as individuals, as whānau, as community is huge. You're talking about everybody in our community who has anything to do with farming, having to question their livelihoods and in some cases consider losing their land. Consider how it is for us, explaining to Johnny's 87-year-old father that has worked on the land his whole life and wants to see the land remain in his family as his father did, that there's a real possibility that the land will not be farmed and it will just go to waste. Explaining to our extended family that visiting and enjoying the place of their birth may be lost. Considering the negative impact on our lives, our children, our future, their future, and our land can be taken away from us. We consider ourselves kaitiaki, guardians of our land for generations to come. We're doing our best to make a living off our land, keeping kaitiakitanga at the forefront. But how detrimental this plan is in its current form is devastating to us as people. And that's my summary.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe some questions. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yes, just one question. You said right at the start that you support the submissions of the Waimakariri Irrigation Limited and the Waimakariri Next Generation Farmers Trust.
Yes.
The Next Generation Farmers Trusts are appearing before us tomorrow. Their submission to us now is that they accept, and this is in terms of Table 8, 9.
Oh, yeah,
and
to
the reduction.
2040?
Yeah, they do
Yeah.
now. So do you also accept that, or are you still very concerned about the 2040 one?
For me, the 2030 is achievable, and
Yeah.
we are really focused on water quality.
Yeah.
What I would like to see happen is that we spend the next 10 years measuring and monitoring so that we know that any changes that we need to implement moving forward are based on a scientific measured model, not a predicted modelling model. So we sit in between like that. I think that there's a lot of points in their submission that we do agree with, but we have to think about it for ourselves and how it is for our farming operation and the work that we've done in relation to this. So we sit with the 2030.
Yeah. And just taking from that, so you'd prefer the 2040 reductions, if required, to be based on monitoring results over the
Yeah.
next decade?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, no, thank you for that. I know there
Thank
has
you.
been some thought around all the different ideas about Table 8.9.
Yeah, I imagine there has been.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, just a couple of things. First of all, I thank you for your mihi. You did a great job. Appreciate it. And actually, you've answered the question that I was going to ask. It was about Mahinga Kai, but you've said you've been working with Environment Canterbury to develop a Mahinga Kai plan.
So back in 2017, before Mahinga Kai came up as something in the farm environmental plan audits that we were focusing on, we were really interested in this, so we contacted ECAN and the biodiversity person before it became a specific officer, came out and visited, and we spent 4 hours going through our farm and learning about different things and eco-sourcing different reeds and what different things were, and he helped us develop a plan and gave us some ideas. It was emailed, it wasn't specifically formal, and over time we've taken that and use that to formulate with our farm environment plan where we're going to focus, because we have lots of stock water races and things like that, but we also have the Cuss River running through our property. And so for us, we needed to know where to focus, and that information that we gained from that visit and subsequent learning about Mahinga Kai has been really useful in that process.
Well, I commend you for the steps you've taken towards improving the Mahinga Kai habitat. Thank you. There's no more questions from me.
Yes, thank you. Well, Mrs. Croft, you know, these processes start with a written document that you put in called a submission. And that's all very important, and it's the way these things are done. But it comes to life when somebody comes along, like yourself and like others that you've seen this afternoon, who perhaps provide photographs as you have. That's helpful, and we get to understand a little bit the actual people who are making these submissions and their enthusiasm that you have, and others too, the enthusiasm you have for sustainable farming. So it's really worthwhile, your effort in thinking about what you were going to say to us and coming in and taking the trouble to be here and to do it for us. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Sheila Hailstone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, we have your original submission,
Thank you.
and it was interesting. And now you have the opportunity to speak to it, and we're looking forward to that.
Thank you very much for this, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you to all the other people in the room. I understand the grand efforts they are making, but I felt this was important to say, so that's why I'm here today, and to speak around the very simple notes that I put in there. Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. You probably remember that quote somewhere from the ancient mariner. So I want to ask you, is this Canterbury's future? Here I've got 3 different bottles of water, called it evidence. One is from a Canterbury farm with the allowable of 11.34 milligrams per litre ratio of nitrates to nitrogen. This one here is from a well in Christchurch Central containing 2.1 milligrams per litre. And the third is beautiful artesian spring water, but in a plastic bottle, bottled by Coca-Cola. So your decision in the next few weeks will impact which ones of these I drink. 10 years' time in the future. They will impact all the future and all the unborn Cantabrians today. So which one would you drink today? Well, if you were concerned about plastic, you would not drink the Coca-Cola water. With only a minimum of recycling, plastic is found in increasingly amounts on our beaches, our oceans, and even in our food supply, and even in our bodies. 1 million of these bottles worldwide are bought every minute. 500 billion plastic bottles will be sold in 2020. And without any disincentives, companies like Coca-Cola will become wealthy at the expense of our environment, bottling free New Zealand spring water into plastic and selling it $3 or $4 a bottle. But what say you were concerned about nitrate levels? Would you be concerned about drinking the well water containing the present permitted government level of 11.3 milligrams per litre? As you probably already know, I'm not taking Coles to Newcastle, but of course it was for the ability of babies to absorb oxygen, which is impacted and they turn blue at this level, though my reading has said it can even happen at levels of 10 milligrams per litre, called the blue baby syndrome. So if you are concerned about nitrate levels and plastic, then at present you would drink the Christchurch water. But what say this water contained 3.8 milligrams per litre of nitrate to nitrogen? Which one would you still drink? Well, Coca-Cola has $1 trillion business plan, and it's betting what decision you will make at that level. Now, to put a little bit of background to me, I came to ECAN over 10 years ago. I brought an elderly lady with me who wanted to give a submission. She had every excuse in the world not to be there. It was raining and cold. She was 85 years of age. She'd had a stroke a year or 2 back, but she wanted her message heard. You will remember that the elected councillors had been removed and Margaret Baisley had been appointed as the chairwoman of the Environment Canterbury. Margaret Baisley, as you know, was not a freshwater ecologist, but formerly a matron of a psychiatric hospital before moving to state services. And sadly, she wasn't there that day to hear my friend Daphne's message. But the message, it was simple. There were no facts and figures about freshwater ecology. The elderly, seer and wise woman simply asked that the government-appointed councillors to remember the bees and the fish, all the insects, the birds, to remember everything, not just cows, need clean water to thrive. Over 10 years on, Fish and Game have noted further nitrate contamination killing fish. Newspapers report dogs dying from drinking water in lakes and streams. Rivers have gone from swimmable to wadable to virtually non-existent in some cases. 1.3 million dairy cows now live on our plains, and the equivalent, I am told, of 14 million freedom campers without a toilet. I drove back through Hororata in the weekend. Irrigators can be seen everywhere, pumping out spray in the hot, blustery nor'west winds, and forests I saw being cleared for grass. The film 7 Rivers Walking in Canterbury highlighted that rivers can no longer even do one of their most important functions, and that is carrying enough silt to build up the Canterbury coast as the sea inevitably rises. Now, Dave Margaret Blaisley has gone. Again, she isn't here to hear this message, but 10 plus years on, you are. And like Margaret, I do not claim to be an expert freshwater ecologist, although I have the Bachelor of Science, so I can understand the value of authenticated scientific research. I have an MBA, but I do not claim to be an expert in farm economics. But this degree does make me question putting all your eggs into one basket, one farm business. A business based on selling milk products into Asia, where 90% are lactose intolerant. And it's not part of even their Eastern culture. And all this while polluting other valuable food sources, mahinga kai, which we've talked of today, which are already valued in these particular societies. For example, Lake Ellesmere, Te Waiora, with once highly valued eel. And particularly given that this business requires sourcing non-sustainable fox face, which you've heard about before, and already knowing that the island of Nauru, which no longer exists or is no longer viable. And we have to source elsewhere, and that area is disputed. But that's not my main point today. My main point is, to be viable, this business requires that the supplier of its main ingredient gives it away for free and does not limit its use. So as you've heard time and time again, apparently the business model as it stands would not survive without this free ingredient. The free ingredient in Canterbury's case is access to pure artesian or river water. And according to some in this business, the business wouldn't survive if this water had to be returned to the level that mahinga kai could also thrive. But let me give you an analogy. I am a property developer, and a farmer has given me free land to use to build my house. One day he comes to me and he says, "You have used building materials containing arsenic, cadmium, and asbestos, and all my animals are dying." And he says, "You need to stop polluting, and I'm going to limit the amount of free land that I give you." And I say, "But my business model won't work if I don't have the free land, and I have to clean up the pollutants. Look how many people I employ, and I have my children to think of." So how would the farmer solve this problem? I expect he would want me to change the materials I use so they no longer kill his animals. And I suspect he would want me to change my business model so that the land he was giving me had some value. So the best thing that could happen is the farmer changes the rules, so I then adapt my business. So that's what I'm asking you to do in your decision making, so that the mahinga kai also thrives and becomes a valuable resource or business, so that everyone's children can thrive. I believe it's a hard decision, but I leave, and how you go to it, you have to listen to these lovely farmers here, is the right one. As I've said, I'm not an expert in freshwater ecology, nor am I an expert in farm economics. Unfortunately, I'm an expert in the one thing that no one here wants to be an expert in, and that is the second reason why I'm here today. I'm an expert in knowing what it's like to be a cancer patient. I was diagnosed with metastatic cancer in 2013. I underwent harsh treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, and had operations. I was given an expensive drug that you, the taxpayer, and me, the also taxpayer, paid for. It cost $60,000. There were nurses, there were doctors, there were hospitals, there were anaesthetists, all at a cost. There was a stress it put on loved ones and the loss of income. And I still have some side effects from the treatment. But I'm not here today for you to feel sorry for me. I am here for you to be clear about the real impact your decision on the allowed level of nitrate pollutants can have on health and the health costs of Cantabrians in the future. Nitrates have been found by Eyerton to flow under the Waimakariri River into the urban water supply. Our own Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey, has scrutinised recent research and says it shows nitrates in drinking water are a considerable contributor to the deadly and debilitating disease of colorectal cancer. A recent long-term etymology study in Denmark published in the International Journal of Cancer with 2.7 million participants showed the increase of colorectal cancer could already be seen at higher concentrations, approximately 2.1 milligrams per litre of water. This Danish study was extensive. It exploited population-based health register data during the 23 million person years of follow-up. 5,944 persons were diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Individual nitrate exposure was calculated at 2.7 million adults based on drinking water quality analysis at public waterworks and private wells between 1978 and 2011, i.e. they were followed for 33 years. Now, there are already many farm wells in Canterbury, as you know, with nitrate levels higher than 2.1. And after the Canterbury earthquake, levels in some central areas went high above this already. From the data supplied to me from the Christchurch City Council wells from 2011 to 2016, I'll read you some. And in the northwest, it reached 6.7 in 2014. It reached 6 in 2015. It reached 8.8 in 2016. It reached 10.3 in 2011. And Birdlings Flat, 6.4 in 2015. And Little River, 2.4. In central Christchurch, where I live, 4 in 2011, 2.1 in 2015, and 4.2 in 2016. In the west, 2.3 in 2016. All, fortunately for us, were colorectal cancer levels only high for short periods. A long-running epidemiology research study program in Iowa also reported an association of nitrate in drinking water, increase of colorectal, ovarian, thyroid and bladder cancers. So what is the true cost of high nitrate levels? Well, I don't know in Canterbury, but the Environmental Working Group in the USA, a non-profit, non-partisan organisation dedicated in protecting human health and the environment, says this. They determine cancers attributable to nitrate contamination of drinking water in the US may carry a cost of $1.5 billion in the USA a year for medical treatment. And you add the impact of lost productivity from people made sick, the annual cost could be $8 billion. We need to consider the true costs of nitrates in our water to the public purse, just as we consider the impact of COVID to our economy. The sad news, the 5-year survival rate of stage 4 colorectal cancer is a mere 14%. And if we look at Canterbury, we already have what appears to be one of the highest level of people diagnosed with colorectal cancer in the world. In 2018, Hungary, the highest rating country in the world, had 51.2 cases per 100,000 people. Individual states in the USA, Mississippi, 58.5. West Virginia, 57. But data from South Canterbury shows colorectal cancer at 113 people per 100,000, twice the numbers diagnosed in Hungary. So in New Zealand, a country I believe sometimes obsessed with physical fitness, our cancer record is not something to be proud of, and not something I believe we should accept as an inevitable way of doing business. For some people, the money made through New Zealand exports of dairy and the business associated with this is more important than the health of other people. But let's ask them, what say it's their health at stake? So if we all agree we need to lower the allowable levels of nitrates, it's just how it's done in our water, we need to look at the time frames. What is the true cost of delaying the changes and allowing the nitrate levels in Christchurch wells to go colorectal level above 2.1 milligrams per litre? How do you tell the young boy growing up in Canterbury without a dad because of colorectal cancer that we're able to continue polluting that water and he should expect to see the nitrate levels rise in his lifetime? How do you tell the little girl whose mummy's hair has fallen out, who is sick from harsh drugs, who has pain from the scar tissue developed in her bowel cancer surgery, who can't work anymore, that they have to live on a benefit, that you need more time to lower the nitrate levels so more mummies will get sick? What is the cost to your life or your loved one's life being shortened and coping with ill health during this time? I believe it's imperative to us work on how, and obviously listening to all our farmers, how we can lower the nitrate levels so we can have a healthy groundwater ecosystem that will deliver everyone clean drinking water in Canterbury. Not just those families who can afford to buy plastic to make the Coca-Colas of the world rich. New Zealand's leading groundwater ecosystem scientist at NIWA, Graham Fenwick, suggests in his evidence the Water Conservation Order hearing at Te Waikarepupu Springs a trigger value of 0.4 to 0.5 milligrams per litre as a precautionary value to ensure ecosystem health. So as I close for you today, thank you for your time. In your decision, please remember the voice of my elderly seer, the bees and the fish, all the insects, the birds, everything, not just cows, need clean water to thrive. We need tough measures, I believe, soon to ensure our nitrate levels hardly increase over the next 10 years, preserving our fragile ecosystem. So I want to ask you, in 10 years' time, which water will you choose to drink? Will we be able to say, unlike the ancient mariner, water, water everywhere and every drop drinkable? That's my hope, but of course, that's your decision. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hailstone. Commissioner Van Bortix, any questions of Ms. Hailstone?
No questions of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No, Ms Hailstone's submission was quite clear. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Ms. Hailstone, it was memorable also for the way in which you've presented it with enthusiasm and with colour, if I might say so, because we've had some epidemiological witnesses. We've had Dr. Black and Dr. Chambers and Dr. Humphreys, and in a way it adds colour to what they've had to say in their different ways, because they don't all agree in detail. And of course, we've had evidence from Mr. Fenwick, and we've got Dr. Rankin coming in a day or two. And so it's all right on the mark. And so thank you very much for coming in and giving the time to preparing it in the way you have.
Thank you very much. I only did that because I'm just one person, I know, in Canterbury, but I feel that maybe just us ordinary people need to be heard. Thank you.
Yes, you're all important.
Thank you.
Now, at one stage, there was somebody called C. Deans coming, but I think I was given to understand they're not now coming. Is Mr. Deans or Ms. Deans here?
No, the submitter Dean vacated this lot.
Yes, very well. So that's the end of the business for today, is it? So tomorrow morning, we start at 10 o'clock with the Royal Forest and Bird Protection Society's submission, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll adjourn now until then.